Item 1, letter of support, Bull County Child Care Center. Josh Morgan.
Yes, thank you all. The Bull County Schools they're applying for a grant to fund furnishings and curriculum for the new child care center going in Jenny Rogers, and they are asked for a letter of support from us, and they need it today, so we rushed and put it on this agenda so we could get approval. Jenny has a copy of it.
I have a copy for everybody to look at.
I move that we sign and deliver this letter of sponsorship for the Bull County Schools tomorrow. No, today.
Second.
Discussion? Looks like another good team effort. So thank you for working on that. Are you working on the grant, Josh?
No, this
Oh.
purely Bull County Schools. There's a lot of grants
Okay.
out there. This is something we ran into when we were before we had a provider on board. A lot of times it is the child care provider that has to apply for these grants. The
Okay.
city's not involved. The city's not an applicant. The city's not, putting any match forward. This is purely through the county schools. It's just a letter of support saying we endorse it.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Any other comments? Okay, chair calls for the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Nay? Motion carries. Item 2, budget discussion. Mr. Coffey.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners. So we're in the budget discussion. Today is going to be a little bit different than last week. The last time, we're in the transition phase of building the budget. Last week, it was pretty straightforward. We reviewed operating expenses. That included, we provided the department detail for each individual department. We had a revenue discussion about the trends of our revenue. We talked about the compensation changes, and those were incorporated into the operating that was presented last week. And the only real personnel change that was made or addition was the EIT position in the stormwater, and that was in there. So keep in mind, we focused on that partly because that's probably, and this is not a criticism of ourselves at all, but that's just the department that probably needs more administrative support, which is why we want to plug that engineering in training position into that department. That industry, it was a new industry back when we created the utility there. And as time has passed, the permit and compliance has got more and more complex in terms of its reporting. And so we feel like that administrative support complements that change over time. By not having that, we would probably say we're underperforming in that aspect in the state's eyes a little bit. And so we is that fair, Josh? Yeah. And so, too, you could see that, we've really not had capital project out of that in the last 2 years, partly too. So this kind of urges all those things along, long time tied to stormwater. So last week we went through and reviewed all of the operating budget. So today is really where last week was more of a straight presentation. This week is more of a dialogue, and where we need your feedback. Lee and I have joked a little bit over the last couple of days. It's a harder transition for me just to even tell her, what my opinion of the presentation is, and it's a harder, and so it looks not as graphically clean as the last presentation. So this is, like I said, a lot more of a discussion day, so feel free to give us your input. If you have an idea, please share it. So what we'll do is, first thing is turn this thing on, then we'll flip ahead. So this is today's agenda in our eyes. We have a draft operating budget, so we've communicated that into the fund summaries. Those fund summaries we'll put up on the screen. Those are on your desk. Then we need to start thinking about the community agencies and those intergovernmental agencies. That's the next step in building the completed budget for us as staff. We'll review some of the cash and investments for you. and look at how that maybe has changed just a little bit over the last couple of years with knowledge. We all talked about pulling down some of the fund balances for some of the projects. Then also, we'll look at our capital program, which is capital investment, and start talking about that. That's where it gets complicated for us, and it really is hard to present because we've had so much external money influencing, the ARPA money, and we've got STAG grants, and we've gotten, pressure from development. So we've got this Lebanon Road project that's continuing. We got a new wholesale agreement on the water, so you got the water line going to Perryville still ongoing. That all of those have external funds, and so it really, the external funding really has filled our plate. What Marcia and I was talking about is it's filled our plate, and so we're gonna have a heavy lift for the next probably 24 months at least. And so we'll get into that, and then we'll talk just a little bit about organizationally. We've changed things and tried to align functions a little bit differently. Recall we did code enforcement inside of the PD, ABC inside of the PD last year. So we want to continue to look and see if there's places for efficiency in what we do. The operating budget fund summaries, those are on your desk. Did you all have any questions from that you had some time to look at the department line items and things like that? Did you all see questions popping up for you that you wanted to talk about as we go on through here? The general fund summary shows that we do have a balanced budget. This does not include capital and does not include funding agencies or the community agencies. It does include some of the funding for the intergovernmental, and we'll show that here in a minute. Before you fund community agencies and before you fund capital, what this spreadsheet shows us is that we have about $300,000 in revenue over expenditures that we can apply towards operating expenses. Some things are categorized as operating, some things are categorized as capital. The capital can come out of your reserves. The operating things have to come out of your operating budget. So community agencies come out of our operating budget, for example.
I was wondering about that because it had I don't know if we're going in the order you had up there, but it seems to me that we should do the capital program before we do the agency allocations, just to see how much we have.
We can do that. I don't have any money necessarily programmed into the budget for community agencies.
Okay.
Ashley's not here. So what I wanted to make sure is did we get your all's thoughts on that? So last year, remember how you all plugged in numbers? Mm-hmm. And did you all do that and give those to her? Okay, yeah. Did you get a chance to do that, Donna?
No, I mean, I didn't, okay. Maybe you all understood something differently. I thought more today was a capital. We were gonna go over capital, and then I guess I didn't.
You don't have, that's okay.
I hadn't been asked to put those in.
So put your recommendations in there, and Ashley and I will put together a summary out of, so like last year, we took an average, and then we made a recommendation based on what collectively you all said. So rather than, we try to interpret what you all say and get to the number that you all are projecting as a group on the community agencies. So we'll make that recommendation, and then we'll look at those one at a time if y'all want to next week.
Yeah, I would.
Does that make sense? So I just want to review what, the goal for me today is to show you how much of a request that has been made in total, but then also to compare that to the fund summary of the general fund, which is about $300,000 left to go towards operating expenses. Okay. Community agencies is an operating expense. So, and then, but also capital, what do we want to try to fund with capital out of that too? So it's.
Yeah, I would like to see capital.
Yeah. So nothing is, we're not trying to make any decisions. We're talking through it, and we're building what our spreadsheet proposal next week will be
What's
based
next
on
week?
some of the feedback we're getting.
Okay, will next week be a draft budget?
It will be more of a total draft budget. So what we do is take pieces and we build it in pieces.
Right.
Right? So that's why we talked about the compensation just as a total discussion topic by itself, right? And then we looked at the departmental operating budgets by themselves. And so then we're trying to build towards a finished product.
Right. So
Right.
the only position, there's no other request for any positions?
There were some requests but I think the general consensus is to sit on those to make sure we get the compensation implemented correctly, because retainage is as important as adding.
Right. Okay.
Right.
I just want to make sure I
The-
understand that.
Yeah, and then the gap, for example, the whole call takers and dispatch, we could build a department around the idea of call takers, but, right now, it's more important to retain the dispatchers we have with a compensation step, right? Does anybody have any other comments on that? Tony, you all feel, and so that's just kind of where we got to when we were talking about the management team a few times. And then, exception of the IT, that's funded through the stormwater rate.
Right.
And we really need to give that department a shot in the arm administratively. And I think that's fair, totally. Right. So going back, we've survived COVID, and so we've got to this point where we had an influx of money during COVID, and so that created some fund balance. We've pulled that down through capital, and so we've ended up what we feel like is that now where our operating range is, what our revenue range is, back to normal. And so things are more predictable, more under control. And so as we go forward, we're trying to just learn and cash flow kind of what we have left. We're going to talk about our cash on hand, and so we'll get into that. Hopefully that makes more sense. Donna, we're just trying to build the pieces of it.
Right.
Okay.
I understand. I just want to understand what my expectation, what you all expect from me.
Yeah,
If
and
there's
so-
something I'm not doing, I need to make sure I'm getting it done.
No, you're fine. You're
He's got a list. But, I want to understand, if I need to get these in prior to today, I
No,
should.
no.
I want to
We,
know that.
I was just curious is the reason I
Okay.
even brought that up. But
So get those in,
we do need those in first part of the week, yeah.
and then
so-
next week we'll go over them.
Correct,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
And when will we hear, or when will the public have a say in the budget, or will they get to say what they would like to see in the budget, or no? A public comment? I've been asked that, and I think we were asked that at the women's.
We have never had a public hearing on the budget. What are you wanting to do?
I thought
We occasionally had a session where we allowed the public to come in or do a survey or something and tell us what's important to them and what they want to include. If,
Not
in
a
a perfect
hearing,
world, but,
right.
yeah, it's not a hearing or anything, it's
Yeah,
just a discussion.
so what we did this year was we focused on the KLC strategic plan, was your all's comments. And Josh has got some money that he's set aside based on that initially, or some requests. You're kind of pushing towards some of those initiatives. We can do that so we know we've got to do a Parks and Rec workshop, and that's really where you're going to get the most feedback, so we can piggyback and have more of a public, so every one of these meetings is a public discussion.
I understand, but.
But,
Right.
yeah, I'm with you on that.
And I'm just asking questions because I want to make sure, you hear it from out there that they want to have a say. I will say,
Yeah, I
yes,
agree.
you can come to every meeting if you want, but
Right.
maybe they might want to speak. Not that they're grants, not that you can do everything people ask, but you can at least listen to what they have to say, what they are thinking is important to them.
Yep. Probably around the Parks and Rec discussion is probably the healthiest spot to begin to interject that, I would suggest.
Okay.
But
Let
we'll
us
say
know
that-
ahead of time. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Let us know ahead of time, because we were asked by a lot of people, and I'd want to get the word out in sufficient time for folks to be able to attend.
All right.
No, I was just going to say that most of the things people have told me that they would like to see were included in the KLC strategic plan. So that's, at least we're all
Yeah,
thinking somewhat on the same line anyway.
Frankly, it's pretty tough to get the public at large to come in and tell you how to spend money when that's kind of what you guys are elected to do. And so we've got to figure out how to help you hear that. And so that's what I, so I'm hearing you'll want to do that. And so we'll have to figure out a format to do that. We have done surveys in the past. That's true. Recently, semi-recently. This year, we were doing the strategic plan with KLC.
Yeah,
We
I mean,
tried
yeah.
that avenue. But
I mean,
definitely.
maybe the Vision 2050 is
Yeah.
that, when we get that started. I'm just saying,
We-
you want to hear them, even if it's at a regular commission meeting, it's just a matter of just wanting to hear them. I'm not saying come in and tell us how to spend the money. I understand we're here to represent the citizens. But
Yeah,
also
yeah.
representing them is hearing them too. being-
Right. I'll have to think about that. Let me ask you this. Would you want to do something at like a 4 PM meeting and be a little bit more coordinated, aligned with a regular meeting? Would you want to do something like that?
That'd be fine, yeah.
Yeah.
With me.
We'll figure out something around one of those. I think that,
The same day, that's great.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
have a specific little time.
yep, we'll figure something out.
We'll leave you alone now, or go ahead.
No. Listen, that's exactly what, we're kind of in no man's land for us, where it's even hard to figure out how to transition between, operating's easy. Doing the operating budgets, your expenses and your personnel costs and your health insurance costs, and Randy's already done that. We talked about that 2 months ago at a regular meeting. That stuff assembles itself with a lot more, linear progression, right? So now we're at that spot where you're talking about capital and you're talking about the public's desires and all of these things come into play, and it's just hard to transition, honestly. And especially for an engineer and engineers and everything else.
We're over on with the engineers. We've got something to spare.
He's wanting to add more. Do we open up a general conversation of what people want, or do we ask them to input on the things we are talking about? So it's more focused, so it's not just, here, we kind of have this list of things we're prioritizing after today or after a conversation, and is this matched public input? I'm trying to think of a way to make it productive.
Yeah,
right?
to Josh's, so say it like, that's gives me a little bit better communication tool. We've been headed in a direction on, for example, parks for a while. You see what I mean? And so it's really, we've gotten to this step, and so now it's really, what does the public want to spend or focus on parks, or are we focusing on building a bridge somewhere? You know what I mean? Like, those are two different directions. So part of what we've been doing is steering in a consistent direction based on the feedback we've been getting over a couple years, couple cycles from the public and from the commission. So that's kind of led us to this spot where we're dealing with parks, we're finishing up streetscape. You follow me?
Right, yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that might be a better way to do it.
so the bigger direction stuff really is that 2050 discussion. Where do we go after the next phase of park? You know what I mean? Like, once we get this round of parks kind of in, where do we go after that in 10 years? What should be our next focus? That's probably a 2050 discussion, and I hadn't got into how to even organize that yet, frankly.
Well, we can do that later on.
Yeah, we'll continue to, we'll come up with something over the next few days and be more intentional about a couple of those loose ends. So the general fund, and then we have the municipal aid fund, summary, police safety, and what you'll notice is that we've tried to project kind of where it ends up on this bottom right corner with the total fund balance after the fiscal year. And so what you can see is that we've tried to have a balance of everything and to leave a fund balance. Streetscape finishes up the current contract. Nothing new, although, maybe, the next step, if you go back to the original streetscape plan, but was also confirmed through the downtown master plan, was to address Walnut Street. We know there's some ADA issues that we've tried to address before. So I don't know, maybe Walnut Street, if you want to look at something in the future on streetscapes. Parks and Rec, again, it's a fund budget, so it shows up as a balance with the fund balance in the bottom right. Cemetery fund, same thing. Capital is listed here, but that's your committal shelters. This is the only one where we have capital listed inside of the fund summary. Then the stormwater fund, again, no capital balanced, but we do have the fund balance that we want to allocate towards capital. We will need some of your direction on that. Garbage fund is, the biggest thing with the garbage fund is making sure we are regularly auditing the accounts, and so that if we do a good job, then that balances. Right now, we're showing a small contribution from the general fund. We'll see, this is an ongoing effort at all times to try to make sure your garbage and frankly, your stormwater gets audited too. Then the utility fund, it's the same thing, no capital, but it's fully funded everywhere else. It ends up with baseline operating revenue of about 12.2, baseline operating expenses about 11.9. Then you've got an influx of external money that is, making all those projects go, and we've got a sheet on that we'll show here in a minute. Museum fund, parking fund, and so now all those operating budgets are kind of building out, and you have a fund summary for each one, which is what your budget ordinance will be created from once we get the total appropriation number, which is your capital. So from an operating standpoint, we've gotten the detail sheets. You've got these fund summaries to sit on. So please give us questions as time passes over the next few days, and we'll try to be prepared to address that next week. Do y'all have anything that's immediate in terms of operating budget? Okay, now, the next one is your community agents. So we want to put these slides up there. There's two parts. There's your interagency funding, which is planning and zoning, et cetera. And so what we did with it is we took, the airport board had their request, which was really a continuation of the things that they had been awarded the last time, and which is some of your capital matches that's required locally. And then also the $50,000 towards their master plan that we've, as a community, have been seeking for a little while, right? So when you're looking at the airport, out of the 137 that I plugged in for that, or that we plugged in for that, 124,841 is really facility capital investment, either through a matching fund or $50,000 for the reserve fund. Okay? So that's fully funding the airport board's request. Then on the economic development side, I had a little bit of a question here. So if we take $50,000 in the fiscal year we're in, deposit with the EDA, the EDA really doesn't have expenses yet. It doesn't own anything yet. It's the EDC should be going through the Asset Development Committee to build recommendations for the EDA. So the EDA probably, do you want to put money set aside additional money to deposit into the checking account of the EDA in the year we're in? I think that's a fundamental question, and I need to hear what you all want to do.
Since they don't need it, or we don't know what they might need it for, it looks like we could just keep it and, have it a placeholder somewhere. So if something comes up, we can help with it, but I'm not sure I see the reason to deposit it right now.
Yeah.
Personally.
I think last year, as we got into the late part of the calendar year last year, when we were discussing about the organizational side of the EDA, I think that's where collectively where everybody got that was on the EDA. I'm theoretically a voting member of the EDA. Not theoretically, I am, but positionally, but we had at the board agreed that was probably the starting point, and then that's kind of the ending point in the short term until you really get something going. Right. And so I couldn't say to add more money to it. And so then the question is, so what we have in our budget that we proposed was $150 for economic development. And so the question is do you want to go ahead then and fully fund the EDC's request, bearing in mind that was an increase in marketing expenses, I think, for them too. They've added staff, so now they have, the full-time staff of your workforce development coordinator. That was not in their original $100,000 request that they had for a few years. So what you heard them say is that they're wanting to increase that number to fully fund those positions. And I think that's the direction the county is going in as well. So right now, I'm going to leave the 150 plugged into the budget for that. And if something happens and you need to peel that back, we can take up that argument at the time. But so we'll leave in the budget the 150 for the EDC and go forward. We won't have any necessarily additional money for the EDA. If that ever happens in the fiscal year we're going into, we'll have to adjust it then. Okay? Planning and zoning is funded at their request. Total of these three numbers are $362,405. That's in your fund summary that you have. So there's no additional decisions that need to be made to fund these at those levels. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. All right, so then your intergovernmental agencies then are funded. Then the next step is your community agencies. And so again, what I was going to say here, Donna, was make sure the proposed column is blank because, we've not gotten this, your all's input yet. And so what we'd like to see is you all please send Ashley, if you haven't already, what your desired proposed column is as an individual. Last year, we listed those, we maxed and min it, we averaged it, and then we then took that and we wrote down a number here for you all to talk about and talk from based on what everybody says. Now, this total that was requested was 205. We have about $300,000 left that we can dedicate towards operating expenses. These are operating expenses, right? So if you fund these fully, you don't really have a lot of room left in your operating if you want to add something else, right? Does that make sense? All right. Then you got to keep in mind the Arts Center of the Bluegrass, they have this number down here that would also be funded from that same pot of money because it's not an operating expense. Okay? And so when we deal with it with Lee, and I've talked about some of these agencies are, like the airport, they're asking, it's pure capital construction on their side, but for us, it must show up as operating expense and it has to be funded with operating revenue, right? Although, again, it's pure capital. So this is similar. This is seen as an investment in a building. However, it has to be funded in competition with other operating expenses. So this is your biggest issue that I see is how you all want to allocate your money or how much, so we've got 300,000, do you all want to tell me a number? You know, I don't know. Or do you all want to treat the Art Center and just talk about that as an individual? Or do you all want to go through the same process with it as you do these other agencies? And send me 5 different numbers and we'll average them and we'll see what you all say collectively. And I'll plug that number in and we can talk about that next Friday, if you want to do it like that. Treat it just like the other agencies.
Doesn't matter to me either way, just, we'll definitely need to talk about it.
Yeah. Does anybody have any, go ahead, Donna.
No, I mean, I just want to make sure this money, I know you say the 300,000 is above and beyond your operating budget, but is there anything else that we're forgetting that we need as because taking care of your house is important before you give everybody else the
I agree
money?
with that. And so, you know, you have on the capital side, which we'll go over here in a second, you do have operating capital such as equipment. To me, that is a good use of that money as well.
Because, I mean, it's important.
Right.
These are important agencies. They are.
Also, right.
But you've got to take care of the inside as well.
Yeah. So bear that in mind, and what we will ask is that probably after hearing the comments so far, which was just that, what we'll do is we'll hope, take the time to fill this out also when you're filling out your other community agencies here, and we'll average that and we'll talk about this in the same way we do these next week.
Do we still have some allocations to go out? Is that why the difference in the allocated versus, no, never mind.
So essentially, there's a max of 300, which we maybe don't even want to spend half, and we're being asked for over 500
That is
total.
my point. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. So you can, you know, that's kind of, and we'll be happy to sit down and talk to you about, or meet with you individually if you really want to get into it heavy. And so we just want to make sure we communicate what you just said, and when you all understand that, so then that's the problems we need your input on how to solve.
And how much wiggle room do we usually need? Like 100, 150? Because we only allocated 144 last year.
That's
And
correct.
of course, there's inflation. But
I
jumping to
would feel
500 is a
better.
lot.
I would love it if your balanced budget was a positive 100,000.
Yeah.
Right, and I say it like that, that's kind of a margin for error for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, so I would love it if you got down to the end of operations and you funded your community agencies and you funded with knowledge how you were funding your capital, and you had $100,000 left over in operations that was unallocated. I just think it's always better to have something there.
Okay.
As a rule of thumb.
At least.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and for me, for whatever, and maybe I'm wrong about that, just the feeling I got was about, I would like to see, if I was doing it all by myself, I'd like to see about $100,000 extra that's just unassigned.
It's gonna make the discussion about the art center
Hard.
pretty interesting. Yeah, hard.
Well,
And there
I
may
mean,
not be, there just may not be money right now for that, and frankly, I mean,
I mean, I don't know how everybody else feels, but we purchased the building, and I think it was, at that point, we were not asked for anything else. So it's hard to see this come forward, you know, a month later, a request.
So do we decide just to treat that like any of the other, discuss it with the rest of them? when we
I
do
think
it?
so, yeah.
Okay.
It has to be funded from the same pot of money. It has to be treated as an operating expense. And so because of that, I think you have to decide, you know, whether or not, I mean, the senior citizen center is important,
Right.
right? So,
Earl, I may have missed this, but my understanding of the EDA is to purchase property to help the EDC.
right.
Where's that money sitting? Do we have a
Well-
budget for that, or?
There, until you, so And some of those, you don't necessarily need to buy the land per se. Like, so a lot of times when you get, it's about assembling the land at a fixed price that you can offer. So it's not necessarily, you're not necessarily buying millions of dollars in property. A lot of times you're going to acquire an option and then you can list it off that option then. The option may not cost very much, because ultimately the property owner gets their money from whoever's buying it to build something on it. And so, there, it's sitting, you would use either new debt service or reserve money to purchase something like that, and in combination with the county. But I think there's a larger process that we need to go through to identify what to purchase. I mean, if that even makes sense for you right now. I know that, that the EDC is, we need to identify some options. And I don't know that step's been completed yet. I know that there's they're trying to get moving with their new staff. They're trying to get rolling. And so it just is going to be, the Asset Development Committee out of the EDC has to be the lead in making recommendations to the EDC. The EDC then's got to decide, does the recommendation go to the Industrial Foundation or the EDA? And then the EDA has to pick up the discussion. So there's several layers to that. The EDA can't really, without the input of your utilities and all these other things, may not be pursuing land by itself unless an opportunity presents itself.
Okay.
Right.
This one, it kind of affects what we're looking at here for the budget. If we're trying to build a pot of money for the EDA, so I just wanted to know.
Yeah. So then the cash investments, do you want to describe this, Lee?
Yeah, I can talk about that a bit. So you have a fourth or fifth little packet of paper. It's just a two-sheeter. So essentially what this breaks down, so a lot of folks we do our funds in a way that some cities don't. You have a quasi-pooled fund that belongs to all of our funds. So this breakdown allocates that back out a bit so that you can get a clearer picture of how much unreserved funds are cash funds, not fund balance, but cash funds are available per each, like for general fund, municipal aid, things like that. The biggest one, obviously, is general fund. So here at the top, it'll go through your true cash as of 5/8/23, how much is restricted, how much is reserved, and then how much is left unrestricted. And then it goes through each fund by cash account, basically. And on the bottom of page 2 is your summary, your sums. Essentially, you end up total fund balance between all funds. You have about 29 million compared to last year at the same period was 46. So essentially, that was the long-term plan, or the 2 to 3 year plan that we've been going through, was to spend down that fund balance that has been accumulating over the last several years, partly due to some debt that we had taken out for things like the fire station, things like that. And then we had also built up some of the reserves from large influx of occupational tax, things like that. So you see the spend down, the intentional spend down of our fund balance. And you are left with about 18 million in unrestricted, unreserved general fund availability.
So on the screen, the blue on the left side of the screen summarizes the very bottom of your sheet. And so right now, going towards the fiscal year, you've got $23 million in the bank that's unrestricted or eligible cash to be used. You have a 25% target, which is $5 million. And so that leaves you with unrestricted and unreserved about $18 million in the bank. Now, that is against the projected operating revenue or operating expenses of 20 million, right? So really, then what Lee and I have talked about a lot about is where is that really that comfortable fund balance that we could recommend to you? And we really, that's the number that is going to fund some of your operating capital, Commissioner Pete, that you're talking about. How low do you go there? And we generally, I think Lee and I felt like that was about as low as we should recommend. And so in order to get it down to that number, though, you've got to keep in mind, you've built Streetscape with cash on hand. You've not
Right.
borrowed money for Streetscape.
You've built your tennis courts with
Cash on hand.
All of your, all capital items for the general fund and park and recreation, even those little minor, planning things have all been cash flowed instead of debt serviced, which it's been a healthy amount. And I think that just for the public and for your all's sake, that 18 versus 20, it's like, oh, where's the extra? It's a timing thing, right? 5/8, that's the date I finished this on. You have the cycles of income, the cash that comes in, and you peak at the end of this month and in June. So I just want to, we're not in the hole necessarily $2 million, but
Yeah, no, that's not.
that's
yeah,
that's a snapshot in time.
Right. So in other words, if we get no revenue, then you've got 18, you got the ratio there divided by 365. That's how many days you can operate without getting any revenue, right? And so you can sit down in just a few, we normally put that on the budget reports. But in the quarterly budget reports is how many days of cash we have on hand. And so unrestricted, unreserved days of cash, right?
So we'd be fine for 10 months,
Essentially.
essentially.
Right.
But do you recommend not going lower than this? Or-
When Lee, you speak
Yeah,
for you.
well, if you look back at your fund balance, and you're down here on page 1 of your general fund, we're estimating to be back down to about 18 million. And then if you go back to 17, 18, you were at 12. And then between 19, 20, 21, you had some debt service funding for the fire station that came in that inflated that significantly. But my feeling is that between 18 and current proposed year, that 6 million increase is, a good inflation number. And so you're back down to where you were, I'm cautious, right? And I don't want to see us overspend when we might, you don't want to overspend and not be able to afford operations, because we have increased significantly our operations in the last few years. And I think it's probably a good point in time to maintain that for a year or two and see where we're at.
Yeah, you're getting to the backside of COVID. Things have stabilized. And remember, we saw that in our revenue sheet a little bit when we had those slides up.
I mean, it's like a rainy day fund, I guess, essentially, or.
It's your
and-
cushion.
And the rain does.
Yeah.
It's your
come
cushion.
sometimes.
It's your balance in your account.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, 25 sounds reasonable to me. Is there an industry standard? Do we know? Nothing, just whatever.
No,
whatever everybody
people
thinks.
do all kinds of things, but what's the biggest emergency? Some cities go all the way down. Even the 25% balance there, the 5 million, that is just a random number. So some cities use that number. So what's the biggest emergency you've ever had? Well, the cities so far has been the ice storm, and we
Right.
spent, $1.5 million. But I can tell you that if we have a major disaster at the raw water intake, that $1.5 million could burn through pretty quick. It could cost you 2 or 3 to get a temporary floating intake,
Right.
you know,
I guess-
quickly.
I guess if a large industry, heaven forbid, left town, that would.
Gives you a
essentially-
chance, it would give you a chance to cash flow through that to try to figure out how to adjust your operations to account for that. Yeah.
Or if you had a
sense.
significant decrease, like you said, somebody left town or just the economy bottomed out.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So, generally speaking, that's, I say that again, this is just kind of where we're recommending kind of stopping, right? Which then makes all the other things get more complicated, right? Now there are harder decisions to make. And so there's the debt service that we talked about last year. Remember, we had talked about at one time, funding Parks and Recreation from a debt issuance of like $8 million to fund this phase. We never took that debt out, right? Like, so we've not borrowed that money. Do you want to fund some things with that, or do you want to wait until you get all the way through? We know we need to finish the streetscape. We know we need to do some of the things that we have active, like the tennis courts and Jenny Rogers and that kind of thing. We can account for those things, but, to do anything else, do you really want to wait until you get all the way? Maybe it's next year that you have a discussion about what additional projects to do in parks, until we get some of these things done, right? Which leads us into the next discussion, which is this. So for us, our priority is to finish the ongoing projects. We've talked about that. Like we know things take a while. Sometimes they can wear on the public at large. Sometimes they wear on us as staff. And so we know that the most important thing we have is get our books clean of some of our active projects. Then we would like to point out again, especially for the utility, you have a large number of projects that are externally controlled, either by compliance like lead and copper, or the ARPA money that has deadlines on the expenditures, right? The big things then operating capital. We know we've got to figure out a way to buy dump trucks, for example, and buy tasers or whatever the police department needs. So then, the major ongoing projects that we end up with is we know that we've got to deal with the wastewater plant phase 1. Phase 2 is a capacity upgrade to be done really when we have a trigger for that, but we're positioned to have it. We've completed phase 1, which was get things out of the ways that we could do a capacity upgrade, right? Lebanon Road Sewer, we've got phase 1 done. We're phase 2. We've applied for an EDA grant. We have SRF money to fund that. Pierreville Road water expansion to the west. We have Springfield as a customer. They're working on their side. We're trying to finish up our side. Streetscape, we need to finish our contract and then assess what to do in the future. Parks, we need to have a workshop to really get into what to do with parks. We know that that's coming. And it may be that we don't fund anything with parks and we do that, maybe that conversation is not complete for 6 more months. And if it is, that just is what it is. So I don't want you all to feel like the budget process is pigeonholing you towards making decisions on some of these things. If we need to compile a budget amendment to accommodate your all's decision-making process, we will do that, right? Like we want those are some of those things are big decisions. And we want to make sure you all feel like you have ample time to make them. We don't want to push you towards conclusions on those things. Although we try to usher the conversation forward, but that doesn't mean that, we're bent to do something, right? the Public Works building down there, so a lot's been said about the homeless, that there's a lot of talk, and everybody's heard it about the meter shop becoming a homeless shelter, so we'll talk about that just up front. Josh has been getting into that subject a little bit. Part of the meter shop is that we need to move those staff to the Public Works building, which was originally intended years ago. And so do we want to go ahead and do that phase? I don't know. So that's to talk about streets and roads. We have some of those streets and roads improvements that's been being discussed, such as Church Street, such as Fox Harbor, out there on the bypass to help take burden off of the intersection where Starbucks is, also the intersection of Applebee's. Just little things like that are small projects. Those are funded out of municipal aid fund. Also, we have the PDI application that was awarded to the EDA. That needs money to, and we will have to transact that. So that's an influx of revenue and an expenditure to accommodate the roadway and property acquisition tied to the PDI application. So to your point, Rick, Commissioner Sears, that will be something we have to account for as time passes, is that implementation of that PDI grant application. So then you get a lot of numbers then. This sheet is, and so we've printed the overall capital list, and it's the last one she put on your desk. Lee did.
Yeah.
So we've got some of the information up here on a slide communicated a little differently than what it is in your hand, but also it just totalizes. So on the operating equipment side, the general fund equipment, these are the various requests for the departments. You have the police department in need of roughly $275,000 worth of capital. This is a new video camera system. This is not in car, or is this both? Is it both? Yeah.
Why do y'all need cameras for flocks of birds? I don't understand that one at all. What is a flock camera?
The flock cameras are the cameras that places in Louisville use it. They have solve some crimes, they do license plate, pretty much. Placed in various parts of the city. They work in conjunction with cell phone towers. Use a cell phone tower, maybe it's a cell number that's activated in that area that the crime is committed. And then you can go back and time that with the flock cameras and look for license plates in that same period of time.
Cool.
So then the fire department has a lesser amount. They have about $100,000 request. Communications has a $24,000 request. And public services has a $317,000 request, including a new dump truck. What's the age of it's been about 5 or 8 years since we bought a dump truck. We tend to try to run those a long time. But there is a demand for a dump truck either in the utility or the general fund.
So
at this
I was just
point.
I see you guys looking. They're rearranged separately, so there is more in public services on the sheet you have there, quite a bit more. I think Earl gets to that on the next slide.
Yes, the
Okay,
next
yes.
slide, and this is when
So
Josh.
this is
thi-
quote
this
unquote
is-
operating capital.
Correct, right. This is operating capital. So then Josh took and general fund specifically, right? This is general fund operating capital. So then Josh took the KLC book that you all created and tried to put some numbers to some of those things just to try to get us started, right? To see what that would look like from a numbers perspective, which is really the next slide. Josh, you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Sure. A lot of this is pretty straightforward. The first line is, we talked about safe sidewalks during the KLC. So that's, I kind of, the 10-year plan, I kind of have that 50,000 just every year for 10 years for us to spend on connections. We need to connect Maple Avenue out further. We need to connect Lexington Avenue out further. You'll then just start doing general repairs on our sidewalks throughout town. So that's what that 50,000 will go towards. We'll probably do most of that work in-house. So this line item we'll purchase materials for the projects. Welcome to Danville signs. We had quite a bit of damage during the windstorm last month. And we have one sign that's leaning pretty badly and one sign that the top is blown off. And before that point, we were even talking about replacing the signs that were there because they were starting to show a lot of age. So I threw a number out there of $30,000 a sign. There's 7 different signs. So that gets you to $210,000 that we'd like to budget. And we've talked internally about doing kind of a design build project on that, where we would, put out a, request for proposals from sign companies and contractors graphic designers that could come back to us with not only a cost of installation, but some design options that can kind of move that forward quickly instead of us getting into a wayfinding situation where we work on design for 3 or 4 years and then we do it. So I'm trying to use a different process to kind of accelerate that. And the good thing is we talked about, we don't have to get encroachment permits because this is just be maintenance on an existing sign that we have. Brownfield grants, we've had that grant this will be going into the 3rd year now. Just to kind of reintroduce everybody to that, we're doing environmental assessments on properties in the downtown area that could potentially have pollutants. That's what a brownfield is. It's any property that could potentially have pollutants on it or hazardous materials. So that's, old filling station properties, and that could be down to lead paint. It's really any hazardous material or pollutant. But that is 100% match, the 100% grant. So any money we spend out of there, we get reimbursement from the EPA on. School districts, traffic projects, that's something I've kind of worked on, and we talked about that during the KLC process of, we've had discussions out at Tolliver, different things we could do on Perryville Street to slow down traffic, and I think we just need to kind of go over all of our school areas, redo the paint for school, look at the signage, different things we can do to improve pedestrian safety around our schools. The comprehensive plan implementation is just half of the 50,000 that's going to go towards Bluegrass Ad for the comprehensive plan. And then the next line item is the 500,000 for the offices for the utilities for water distribution and sewer rehab at the Bisco building at the Public Works Garage. And that would then free up the meter shop for whatever decision we decide to make on it that could assist with the homelessness initiative. We're looking at some different options there, what's going to be the best outcome. We've put in $250,000 for the police department renovations. They're working on the design now. I was hoping to have some rough numbers already for that, but I think I'm going to get those in a couple of weeks. But we went ahead and put a $250,000 in there. I think we really can just decide what we want to spend. Like, I think we're going to get a menu of options of things we could do over there, and we can kind of set that number where we want to. And also, as we get this design completed, we can look in the future as well. If we want to push some of those improvements to talk about those next spring, that's an option as well. But we wanted to go ahead and put some money in there so we can get that started. And then City Hall, same kind of thing with the sidewalks. I'm going to keep a general $10,000 number in our budget for City Hall just every year, just different things that we need to do to make sure we keep this building feeling new and feeling modern so that we don't get in a situation where we're looking to spend a lot of money on a big project later on. Just kind of keep us working on some, preventative stuff. And then wayfinding, we've made progress on that in the past couple of weeks with the KYTC. They came down and met with us, either last week or the week before, and I think we're really close to getting that encroachment permit. So I kind of keeping that $80,000 line item in there. So honestly, it's in this year's budget, correct? The current year's budget, I think. So if I get that encroachment permit, we'll go ahead and start that procurement process. But we put it in there because it probably will. Once we pay we probably won't pay for the signs, even if we got that encroachment permit next week. By the time you put the order in and get them delivered, we're probably not paying for the signs until next fiscal year. So we went ahead and included that to carry over. Not a procurement system. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that's mine, procurement system. We need a better internal system of how we do procurement for consistency and there's a lot of systems out there that give you the ability to reach more vendors and suppliers than we currently are with our internal process, and frankly, our internal process varies between who's doing it each day. So I think it would be extremely beneficial and potentially a big cost saving based on what I've seen from some of the vendors out there for a procurement system.
So then, Josh, you want to continue? Yeah.
So we have three items in municipal aid. The Church Street and Fox Harbor extensions are kind of carryovers that we've kept in the budget. We're going to try to prioritize those, and that'll be funded by municipal aid. The Southern Connector, the extension of North Stewart's Lane, is another name we kind of call it. That is 50% funded by the PDI grant. So we're looking at a total cost of $150,000 that we will be matched by 750 of that will be from the grant. But we'll spend down, I think we have a little bit of money in the municipal aid fund, but we'll spend that down with these projects. And then we're going to continue to keep our paving projects moving along as well with the remaining municipal aid kind of operating revenue.
Josh, where's Fox Harbor at?
So that's the road behind Kroger. So kind of a project Earl and I have talked about since I came back was connecting Fox Harbor to Belinda. So that would free up that neighborhood back there to have two outlets onto the bypass. They could use Denmark and Belinda, which just spreads out your traffic flow. And it also puts Belinda at a point where it's probably going to be signalized for good or bad. I mean, it's another signal on the bypass, but it's an intersection that we've identified as being fairly dangerous and probably in need of some kind of traffic control.
Part of it too is you would have the potential to remove your local traffic that is going to Kroger, and you're more likely that they'll come back into their homes without getting on the bypass, without going through the intersection at all. Right? So for me, the biggest catch is it has potential to help folks that want to go to TJ Maxx go home a different route, or Kroger or wherever. Cemetery, there's your committal shelters we
Yeah.
talked about.
Yes, so we got $150,000 for the Bellevue Communal Shelter for next fiscal year. The $100,000, we'll work with the cemetery committee on where we kind of keep a general upgrades number in the budget. I've identified some fencing improvements we probably need to do, and that we could spend a lot of that on fence at Hilldale especially. Some improvements we need to make there. And there's also some, we've done some field trips lately, the cemetery committee has, out to each cemetery, and we've identified some road improvements they like to make, widening some corners here and there, just making it safer for people to get around. So I think we can spend that on some general improvements at the cemeteries that are needed. And then stormwater. So Lee and I have been scrambling on the stormwater. I don't know if I was missing some lines on my spreadsheet when I filled it out. I could take out a lot of money out right now on this section. The engineering line can go away, the $50,000. The stormwater improvements, we'll leave that in there for $50,000. That's just general improvements as we find necessary repairs around town. We've talked about, we've got the Dillahay culvert. There's improvements here and there that we need to do, and that $50,000 will fund that. The Streamland, $1.5 million, reduce that to $150,000. We've got a small project we need to complete out there, but that $1.5 million numbers is, and then the East Main project you could strike through that as well. That's not a project that we need to pursue right now. So that's that, and then the other numbers remaining. So we've got a good fund balance in stormwater that we need to start spending, like Earl kind of identified. With the EIT, we can start moving that forward. But that subbasin, so we need to start doing some assessments and building a list of capital projects to complete, so then we can start spending that fund balance down. So I've got assessments. We've already, you all have already approved the scope and fee for subbasins F and G. And then as that gets moving along, I'll come back to you all later and we'll talk about subbasin S and moving forward with that. So we'll start moving down our list, the list that we started 15 years ago working on. We can actually start moving down that list and start doing assessments and start building that list of capital projects that we need to pursue.
That, when you adjust for those, it totals $300,000 in total for stormwater. I think there was just some old items hanging out, because it's a 10-year forecast. I think there were some old items that didn't translate between multiple people working collaboratively on a spreadsheet, so.
Stormwater F is streamlined, right? Stormwater basin F.
F is, like we talked, it's everything north of town to Streamland.
Okay.
Streamland is, I believe it's A, and that's
Well,
the one that was
okay.
done a few years ago. Which I've got a project out of that I need to complete. We're still working on getting easements on that project. And like we talked about, that's one of those things that I could really hand off to EIT to help me out with and get those moving forward. It's kind of been a little stagnant just from a capacity standpoint for us to get those
Okay.
things moving.
And, I mean, just for mine, and G
Yeah.
and S, what are those? I mean, and if you
Trying to
don't know,
think
that's
about,
okay.
I think S is south, the south end of town.
Okay.
I believe it's either, I'm trying to remember, I think one of them's R, one of them's S, east and west of
Okay.
Houstonville Road. I'm pretty sure S is the one that is west of Houstonville Road.
Okay.
So
That's
you're
the same
talking,
as
that's correct.
Yeah,
they-
those are two different watersheds. We've looked at this one and preliminarily, we're looking at the one on the west side with that.
Are they the same as the stormwater master plan we did way back? The-
Same,
Yes.
same
Yeah.
exact
That's
basis.
why I
Get you
was
a copy.
trying- Yes, about this thing, no.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just,
Yeah.
in my head where they were, what they were.
Yeah, I'm trying to, when I went through it, I mean, like I said, I guess 15 years ago, I went through and kind of prioritized that list of subbasins. We tried to look at the size of them and the age and the need of projects that were listed in that, the stormwater assessment that was done.
2005,
Yeah,
2007.
well, I think we
You
even.
colored it with crayon. I
Yeah,
don't know how
yes.
long ago
So-
that was.
So, and I think also I tried to move around town. I tried to move to different parts so we didn't stay in one area too long. We kind of moved to different areas. So I think that's, S is on the south end. And that's a much smaller basin than F and G. It's that's F is probably the biggest basin in town. So.
So then gets complicated. This is your utility and will make your head hurt. This has a lot of external funds on it, and this is like hieroglyphics. I'm gonna ask Marshall to explain the interpretation of this.
Okay, so what I wanted to do is just kind of bring to light some of the future external funding that may be available coming into utilities. This is something that, it comes across in the current fiscal year, but this is all work that was done previous years prior just to get this point. So broke these out into sewer and water. So let's start with the highlighted green projects. So that's the Spears Creek Pump Station. As of right now, based on this chart, the expected construction is 1.7, so 400,000 of that we've got allocated with the STAG grant. So if you see that broken out over there, there's the 400K. And then leftover, we're looking to supplement the leftover, the 1.3 with ARPA city money. So you see how this kind of flows that way. Then you got your Clark's Run Phase 2 sewer. This is to piggyback on the work that we're completing for the Phase 1 out at Lebanon Road right now. This is going to run all the way over to the park downtown and then carry on to the east. This has a little bit larger price tag of $6.715 million. We went originally to a lesser amount with SRF, and they came back and said that, there were some additional funds available. Do you all want to pursue those funds? And we said yes. If you look in that category under SRF, you see the 6.715, and it has 300 and change is forgivable, so, which is good in that total. And then we are also in good position for an EDA grant of $1.9 million to help supplement that project. So if we were to get both, we just wouldn't use all the SRF money, right? So, and then you got Junction City and Perryville sewer improvements. So this is back to the county ARPA discussion. This is actually a collection of smaller projects. This is 6 projects rolled into one. Total price tag is around $2.8 to $3 million. So all that's accounted for with the county ARPA money. And right now, we've got an RFQ to do that work. that we're putting together right now. So moving forward with that. And then I'll come back to the grade portions and the top portions in just a second. We'll skip on down to water. That's the Perryville Road Phase 3 project. This is the interconnection project to Springfield that Earl was talking about earlier. We've actually got an agreement with Springfield for a wholesale agreement already in place. This is the connector between the end of Tuggle Road, where we are now, where the new tank is, all the way through Perryville to the west, all the way to the west side of Perryville. So that has a price tag of 1.75. We're looking at implementing the city ARPA money on that too. Lead and copper, this is a discussion that you probably heard me talk about a few times in some of our commission meetings about large-scale differences in the Cleaner Water Act over the years. They're really focusing on eliminating lead in some of your service lines in your cities, and especially in your school systems and somewhat. So that's a priority project for ours too. You see under SRF money, we've got funds in the pipeline to do that with an even larger forgivable amount of over $800,000, which is good. And then the 2168 bypass, that's a proposed water line project on the bypass on the north side of town through the roundabout, if y'all are familiar with that area. Right now, we've got cleaner water grant money allocated for that to the tune of $950-some thousand. Then you got your US 150 bypass or pump station project. It's kind of rolled into the McKinney discussion. I'll touch on in a second, but this is a project that we need to get on the books to add some flow improvements, capacity improvements to the east side of town. Looking at roughly $500,000 for that project and rolling that into the city ARPA money as well. And it's kind of married to the McKinney Waterline project. So right now, AG Engineering is working with McKinney in conjunction with the city of Danville to install a new water line from the tank that we currently have on Airport Road to go cross-country to help service McKinney's water needs. If you all remember, in the past couple of years, they've been deficient on some of their regulatory concerns, but also their water capacity overall. So we're working with them to help supplement their needs. That project is roughly $1.5 million. That'd be on the city of Danville's side. That's not the total project to get to McKinney. And then if you go back up to the top, I'm coming back up to these for a reason, simply because they're such large ticket items. So we're finishing phase 1 of the wastewater plant right now. We should be coming online in October of this year. You got your wastewater plant phase 2 there at the top. This would increase the plant capacity from 6 million to 9 million gallons a day. Of course, this ties into that whole EDA conversations that we've had over time. You have industries coming into town. Some of their first questions is, what's your water capacity? What's your sewer capacity? Because we have to have X, Y, and Z to even think about coming there, right? So that's tied into that conversation. So when it becomes a capacity situation for the city of Danville, that allows us to enter into those discussions more freely and hopefully become more attractive to some of those industries. Then you got your Spears Creek force main. This is it's related to that Spears Creek pump station improvements down below, but this is somewhat of a separate project because this is a cross-country force main project that extends all the way from the north side of town to around the east and across the golf course and all the way to the sewer wastewater treatment plant. So that's why it has a pretty big price tag of its own. That's
Let's stop on that right there for a second.
Yeah.
So that force main was put in the early 80s, right? So it's 40 years old. So in the last 40 years, there has been a demand that has increased on that. So while it is easy to upgrade a pump station, I take that back. It is much easier to upgrade a pump station because you can get bigger pumps and put improved controls in it. The force main is limited by how much water you can squeeze through that pipe. And so with Spears Creek, we're starting to bump that. In addition to that, this was ductile iron, and the water that is going through it can be corrosive. There's a lot of air release valves on it. So anytime that the pumps are off, you get air pockets in the line. Those those start to rot the line from the inside. It's very corrosive environment, the most corrosive environment. And so this line, being 40 years old, is starting to reach the end of its useful life too. And so what Marshall is doing is correctly trying to figure out how to program it into an expense to get that thing maintained correctly over the course of time, right? Now, we built the lagoon a few years ago to protect the pump station so that you can scale down your design of the pump station. So then your storm surge that you're getting out of the whole north side of town that goes through that station is kind of, it's a dampener. That lagoon dampens that impact on that, or the design curve a little bit on that pump station. It also helped the force main, so that's buying you time by doing those projects, which is good too. So now what we can do is drain the lagoon down, then turn the pump station off and work on it for a few hours while the lagoon catches all the flow, right? So we don't have a bypass and just doing basic maintenance like we used to do. At one time, there was, you were, the only way to work on the pump station was just bypass.
I think Jenny and I both had calls from people down at the end of Graybrook. And I guess is that pump station not big enough to do what it's supposed to do, or, because it floods down there pretty regularly, but.
Well, I'll look into it. I'll see what the situation is. Most of our pump stations are at capacity, or, they have eligible capacity in them. Maybe you could be a number of things. You could have a lot of, in a heavy rain situation, it's not uncommon to get stormwater into the sewer lines itself, and it overwhelms some of your pump stations at times. So there's a whole other aspect to our program of eliminating a lot of what's called sanitary sewer overflows in I&I. We're trying, long story short, trying to keep that stormwater out of your sewer system so it doesn't do just that. Sometimes it overwhelms your pump stations, but I'll look into that. So,
Are you talking about a manhole or a pump station?
Pump station is what I was told, but
The
anyway.
old pump
it's-
station site at the end of as it enters the golf course, remember that was removed.
Right.
And moved downstream, so there's not a pump station there
Yeah.
now.
the,
it could be a series of manholes or something that maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the person that I talked to was, I think, the first person on the left as you go into the Rolling Meadows part of
Okay.
Graybrook.
Okay.
And there's a storm sewer drain across the street from him that he says gets backed up. And
That's a storm
Watch it.
sewer, yeah. And so we've worked on that one time before.
okay,
Yeah, that's a storm sewer problem, not sanitary sewer.
okay.
Yeah, that helps me.
So I'll continue off of yours. So does that also go near Seminole Trail? That
Well-
whole area?
Yeah, a lot of that would be in your same catchment basin, I'm sure. But again, if it's sanitary sewer, I'll work on it and look
Okay.
into it. If
It
it's
was a
storm
s-
sewer, I'll work with Josh and figure it
Yeah, it
out.
was a stormwater channel and a sewer manhole issue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This-
and so the
And
problem.
they try to clean it up, but it's constant with rain time on Seminole Trail
Okay.
area.
We'll look into it.
Yeah, that helps a little bit, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But, so in summary, really what this chart was meant to do is just kind of break out our priority projects and then show how we've got anticipated funding allocated for each of those projects to help pay for them. So, of course, again, your two big ticket outliers are wastewater treatment plant Phase 2 and then the Spears Creek force main, so. And again, those are probably for future discussions in future fiscal years. We just need to further discuss that internally and figure out, true criticality of needs for those type of projects that are just large numbers. So, and it is what it is. It's, you get into, when you start to have discussions about, cross-country projects and large-scale, either technological or capacity increases to something as intense as a existing wastewater treatment plant, certainly the costs are pretty expensive, so. But that was kind of what this chart was meant to do, is just break down the funding availability that we anticipate on the horizon for these projects.
And this is all, generally speaking, external funds, other than SRF, which is funded through, it's a debt service
Yeah,
issuance tied to the Lebanon Road sewer.
yeah.
So when we put more money towards offering water to other cities, do we make money off of that?
So the McKinney is recovered, so you would recover 100% of that cost in the rate.
Okay, because it said wholesale, so I wanted to make
That's
sure.
a wholesale that is a new vendor, a new contract.
Okay, so we would make money. We're not
Correct.
selling it at cost.
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
And the same with the Springfield.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're selling at your wholesale rate.
Yeah.
Right. So this slide was just put together to talk about some other outstanding items that we have to resolve. The big thing, the upper ones have been discussed, but the operating capital down at the bottom, the biggest problem that we have is sludge, is that's an ongoing issue that we deal with. The Henson Pond is actually the sludge lagoon for the water plant. Most folks don't realize that at all times, and that's became more apparent over the last few years as we've removed sludge at different times and we've let it fill back up. The wastewater plant, you have the big lagoon right there at the front of the plant. We've stored remember we talked about the land farm historically. Donna, you may not remember this, and Rick, because we've talked about it while you guys were off. But the land farm, the regulation on the land farm has reduced our ability to discharge sludge there. And so because of that, then one of this first phase at the wastewater plant was to install permanent mechanical dewatering equipment. And so we're going to have to get rid of some of that sludge we've been keeping in the system out there on site, whether it be in the lagoon or the holding lagoon, and this is just a way to do that. The GAC regeneration, we have been doing one filter a year based on the lake demand. That price has gone up a little bit. What Andy's asking, I think, this year is to do two. Then Tower Hill, it's time to repaint it. It's 20-plus years old. It's an external paint job. The inside is generally in good condition. And then we want to buy a large pump.
Yeah, it's be for Spears Creek Pump Station too. So those pumps are just, they're pretty expensive. You get into the larger pumps that service your larger pump stations like that, and they're $80,000 and $90,000 a piece. So, again, that's something that has a really large lead time too, to even get them delivered as a buyer. So anytime you order a large pump like that, you're looking at 20 to 24 weeks to get it, because they don't keep those on the shelf. Like, so when those orders come in, they actually say, okay, we're going to start manufacturing said pump, and then it takes, you're at the mercy of a global market, because a lot of those are built in like Germany or Switzerland. So, and they're not cheap. But when they go bad and your pump station can't pump the sewage out of it, you have a major problem. So then you start to get into regulatory concerns with Division of Water, and which you don't want to get into. And then the equipment line is just extra equipment, a dump truck for utilities, a rotting machine for our sewer collections folks, and some additional equipment on the end of some of our track hose.
So that's kind of all the pieces now you've seen that it's going to take to finish the budget. And so those are the things that we need to get input on over the next couple weeks as we build a draft. We have a long list of capital needs. We need to figure out what we want to do there. The operating budget's pretty well reserved. We see what that looks like. You've got the general fund summaries. We need influence on community agencies. And so that just kind of settles that out. Does anybody have any obvious questions I know This is the part where it's hard to communicate for us, because it's graphically, there's no good, clean way to just make a single graph or a slide that communicates it. So what we'll try to do is totalize things for each fund, capital request for each fund or something, to try to figure out a way that it communicates a little bit better than this engineering looking drawing that we put together. I mean, we understand that this is, kind of makes it look complicated, but, and it is, it is, because everything that you're doing with these capital projects, you got to exercise management discretion on. You got to be able to identify what's more important, and the assessment of the condition of the equipment that you're replacing or improving, right? That's constantly, makes it more complicated than it feels like it should be.
Well, and to Earl's point too, it gets complicated because sometimes, some of these funding mechanisms aren't just, you see them on paper as a single lump sum, but they can be spread over multiple fiscal years, because you're beholden to, you may, ARPA, for example, you have to have the ARPA money obligated to a project or any number of projects by December of 2024, but it has to be expended by December of 2026. So now you're straddling multiple fiscal years, right? So it's hard to kind of describe that in the expenditure of those funds, because it's not uncommon with a larger scale construction project, and Josh would probably be agreeing with me, is that you can't get all that done in one fiscal year. So therefore, you can't expend all that money in one fiscal year. So sometimes it carries itself over multiple years.
Easements do matter. Easements can really mess with your schedule, right? You can be delayed into another fiscal year just because you've lost time to get an easement signed by a month, right? So we'll try to figure out a way to communicate that better than just throwing numbers at you. But we've tried to put all the numbers in front of you so that you can kind of get your head around the gravity and the magnitude of the problems and that kind of thing.
Is there any way, because I'm pretty thick generally, so the budget as we have it so far doesn't have any capital in it other than the couple
Correct.
items that
Yeah.
you mentioned. So I guess my question is, how much do we have to play with? Or, not a good choice of words, but how much do we have to apply towards all those requests, which are all valid and necessary?
So I think that's part of like Earl's, this is my opinion. I think that's part of the harder part of this conversation, right? You all have to give us some feedback as to what direction we go, right? Because we've pulled our fund balance down quite a bit, and with the remainder of streetscapes, Jenny Rogers, and the tennis court, you're gonna cash flow that really well and kind of keep your fund balance where it's at. But you have to decide, do you want to bring that down a little bit to fund some of these items? Do you want to hold off on some of these items until a future fiscal year? Do you, is there some, and, we can obviously give our opinion, our feedback, what we think is a priority, but do you want to plan to debt service things?
I think that you all prioritizing, or the department heads prioritizing what would be helpful for me anyway.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll try to figure out what a recommendation might be. And we'll try to make 2 recommendations. And keep in mind, 3 years ago, when we started on this aggressive approach, we were counting on borrowing money, right? And we had budgeted to borrow some money to offset some of these expenses. We've not done that.
Right.
And so,
kinda have that out.
we'll have a scenario where maybe that you do a small debt issuance, or maybe you don't. I don't know. We'll try to provide at least a couple options, and one of the options, frankly, may be sit here for a year, do nothing, besides finish what we have started that is already funded, like the streetscape and like you follow me? And so that's always not, do nothing is an option, right? But we feel like that's not necessarily plausible with,
Right.
with, particularly on the utility side where you have so much externally funded projects. You know, you have to push those. So we'll try to figure out as close to a do-nothing approach, and then maybe two options off of that.
That would be helpful. I mean, and you get into the situation, which, you know, you've been at this a long time, that, so you don't do it this year, you're gonna have to do it sometime. And so when
Yeah.
is that time? That's the kind of fight I have
Well,
with
some of the
myself.
stuff, you know, you've put off for a year, and all of a sudden inflation hit, now
Right.
it's double,
You can't-
and you can't afford it anymore. Like, you know, we know that. So that's a concern. Yeah.
So but there are some capital projects, obviously, and there's money in budget somewhere because they're ongoing, correct?
Well, we originally, like streetscapes, which is, you know, funded by transfers from the general fund. Originally, we had planned for, a debt issuance, but we had the reserves and we have been able to cash flow just paying for it. So that, you know, looking ahead, for that one particularly, we didn't include much capital in like your fund balance and those, but that one is. We can go back and add in the remainder of the tennis courts, which I think is pretty close. Most of that has already been funded. And Jenny Rogers, those I think are the three big
Those would be in
projects
there,
that are
right.
ongoing, that
Okay.
are still quote unquote unfunded by debt, but that were cash flowing. But I've been monitoring it if I thought that we couldn't, if we couldn't continue like that based on these numbers, I would have already told Josh he can't spend any more money. That he
And like the
they had
Public
to
Works
stop.
building is in there too?
I'm sorry,
The
the
Public
what?
Works
Yeah,
building?
yeah.
So that's a capital project that's already ongoing, but it's in there, it's just, I mean, it's not,
It's,
there's money in there, in the budget.
So you have, remember you borrowed money several years ago, and you may not remember this, for the fire station. That debt issuance also included the purchase
Right.
of the trucks, included the renovation money set aside for that. The balance of that debt issuance that's restricted for those purposes is this number here,
Okay,
right? And so this number is not showing up here, right? It's peeled out, it's separated.
okay, because you know there's projects going on, and there's
Right.
money in the budgets.
yes.
Somewhere for capital, obviously.
So some of them are in the estimated year end
Right,
of the year we're in, that is used to calculate what the fund balance is projected to be.
right,
So then if you don't spend the money this year, your fund balance will be higher, but the
Right.
expense will be higher next year.
Right.
So that's going to your point, that will wash out across the fiscal year based on what the actual expenditure rate is, and then what the fund balance varies relative to that.
okay, that's what I was trying to get at, because
Right.
there's projects in.
Were we gonna, finance the whole thing on the streetscape and the tennis courts and?
Originally, you were gonna do an $8 million debt issuance for the parks projects. For parks. Originally, you were gonna add $4 million in debt for streetscapes. Isn't that what the number was?
That's pretty
I
close.
think so, yeah.
And then the parks were scaled back, obviously, and the streetscape went up a little bit, but, we instead pulled the fund balance down and cash flowed that rather than debt service it, which I do think was a good choice.
Yeah.
Let's,
The economy, you gotta
$12
keep in
million
mind, your general fund took a big jump because of the net profits a couple of
Right.
years ago. When the federal government pumped all that money in the economy, we saw that in our net profit. That has, that is one of the biggest contributors that has kept us from borrowing money for these projects. Right. That and the fact, and I give staff a lot of credit. I mean, staff navigated COVID and did a terrific job. And gosh, I didn't say 2 times really to just watch what you spend. I didn't have to. And from my perspective, I didn't have to. And I really, I give credit to staff and thank them a lot. We have some good department heads that are in the city. And that's just a reality, and we're fortunate to have them.
Agreed.
So then, coming back to, we'll continue this discussion. Keep in mind, we're building towards a draft budget. Then what I built into the budget calendar is to taking all this conversation we just had and having a draft budget generated. Then we can present that, get comments back, and then we built out another follow-up meeting with a draft budget post-comments, right? So we're building up these pieces to assemble a general fund budget, or I mean, a city budget. So there's still several steps that we can iterate through. And then if we need to have more meetings, we can, right? Then the next step is we talked about organizational structure. We've looked at this every year. It's one of the things I look at almost exclusively. Remember, so the first year we added utility admin. We subsequently added 911 and ABC, and we did some things like that. And so then we've landed, this is the current organizational chart for the city. We have the city manager led by the city commission, obviously, that we didn't put on the screen, but we have police department, fire department, municipal utilities, parks and rec, engineering, city clerk, IT, finance, HR, and then we've added the community liaison. So that's a lot of management team staff. Mm-hmm. And frankly, that needs simplified a little bit. It has too many people. It's a very flat organizational chart, and there needs to be a little bit more tree organization to it, right? So I've gotten into it in my head, trying to help, and I appreciate Melanie trying to get out of my head onto the screen, this chart. But I think she was about to smother me underwater. But so she's done a good job of trying to simplify this a little bit into more of a departmental structure is the way I've looked at it. We have emergency services, so we have a police department, we have a fire department, we have municipal utilities, and then we've had these multiple departments over the years. If you go back and look at all the old budget books even, it's referred to as public services. When we say public services, most citizens attribute that to public works, right? Mm-hmm. That's not really what public works is part of public services, right? So then what we felt like is a better title for that is probably community services. And so then when you think about so garbage, for example, is embedded in public works, and stormwater is embedded, cemetery, those are really community services, right? Beautification, that's a community service. So when we think about that retitle, then what else can fit in there? And then your development fits inside of your community services. How do you support development? For example, planning, the support Josh gives to planning and zoning. And so then we've added Parks and Rec as we just plug them in as a department, right? We just drop them into our organizational chart. And so what we'd like to do is try to figure out how do we efficiently manage those facilities. And so what you see is there's a significant amount of overlap of the maintenance on some of the smaller parks. And so really effectively, to be more efficient, we need to embed probably Parks and Rec in that same organizational tree as Public Works is. So that you get the correct use of the mowing contractor, for example, mows all of city property, not just Parks and Rec, right? When we have a tree fall in the park, Rick is dealing with that as Public Works Director, right? So there's continuity in management if you embed both of those facilities inside of your community services agency. And so with the structure that we have now, that aligns good with, to me, engineering, with the talent that we have in and around engineering. And if you add the IT to the stormwater program, then you really free up that and simplify your management team structure a little bit. So your management team can be simplified by consolidating some of those departments into this community services. That's what I think, right? And so then your community liaison operates over by the side, really doesn't do a department, but really is a catch-all for everybody as they need it. the city clerk really works on the side too. That's the executive assistant for you guys. So as you need something, you're contacting the city clerk and getting support of that. That's really, you know, supervised by the city manager, but really is also an arm of the city commission fully with statutory requirements placed on that office, right? So to me, this is the beginning of not an end point, but a beginning of a conversation with about any changes we want to do to the organizational chart. This is the immediate thing I can see that would make us operate more efficiently, just a little bit more efficient. Then the other thing is, and Nick and I've talked a little bit about it with IT, I feel like there's a better way to do IT. I don't know what that is right now. And so, for example, as an industry in the world, not just in the city, IT started as, you know, just having a series of desktop computers and a mainframe, and then suddenly, you know, we did our original financial software in-house, and it was converted, and we added as we needed more computers, we just added staff to that, and then because you add now two IT techs, you've got to have a director, and then we just kind of built that department, but we're not the only entity that has done that. All your major companies have done that. They've just built an IT department. But what we've talked about with Nick and talked about with staff separately is, you know, the police department has body cams and all these things, and which is totally different than what Marshall needs as a utility IT person. Needs to be, you know, you've got a lot of motor controls and computer controlled devices, which is totally different than just the body cams and the MDUs that are MDTs that are in the cruiser. I don't know why I said MDUs. The MDTs that are in the cruisers are computers, and then too, like if you are riding around with a cruiser, which I've done, when you're riding around with the officer and he's got something he has to print, he can print it at the jail. By the time he gets there, he signs it and hands it to the jailer, and then that transition is really easy. But think about his MDT being able to print to the jail, right? Like, so IT around the emergency services is fairly unique, looking at what's on the fire truck, for example, and how that communicates to dispatch and the whole link with CAD and those things. And so there's an improvement to be had with IT, and I just don't know what it is yet. And I want to continue to take an opportunity with Nick's experience to work through that with Nick and just to kind of see what we can do to make IT function, make it more sustainable in the long term. And it may be that then the commission there has to be a network administrator because of the security. And you all set the policy on security and things like, you know, use of computer equipment, and, you know, it'd be nice to have a computer standard where that we only buy a particular type, or you know, so that we don't get a department head purchasing something that isn't consistent with what should be on our linked to our system. So we have to have standards, and that's really a city commission approval. Right? And so when we go out and we look around, some cities embed the network administrator and some of those functions inside of the city clerk position because that's purely policy of the city. But at the same time, that's fairly technical. Other cities, as they've moved, you know, like E-Town, for example, when they moved the utility out of the city, then they embedded IT inside of the police department because it's so that's really the biggest thing they have left. From that is a demand load on that technology is their police department, their emergency services, where dispatch is. So I don't like either one of those for IT. I still, for us, the way we're right now, you know, I think Nick and I have to come together to try to figure out what to do with that so that it's sustainable long term. And so that then the management team, you want the management team, in my eyes, to be the functions of the city. What does the city actually do? We do police, fire, community services, and we do utility. Everything else then is separate. It's a support operation of your basic services that you're providing. So your finance department really supports all your departments in processing their transactions and managing the cash flow of those other four departments. Then also your HR is also a support function of all those other departments. And critical as Randy is, and y'all have seen how helpful he is and how effective he is at doing his job, it supports all the departments separately. It's not really, Randy, the HR department doesn't do anything for the overall mission of the service that we're providing, right? So I want to make sure we think through that to where we really have a functional organizational chart that's modernized a little bit and consolidated. We don't have scope creep so that we end up with ABC correctly aligned in the police department like we have now. So this is, I know this is really subtle, going from this to this, but that does simplify things a little bit for us, believe it or not. And so then we'll continue to dive into that. Nick and I will continue to talk about it. We've not spent a lot of time yet, but by the time we get to the final budget, we'll try to clean this up, and we'll include some chart. Please tell us, but just understand that simplifying this another step is in my head, and I think we've talked about it with different management team members, and I think there is a lot of, that actually would be better because, so take code enforcement, as our long-term code enforcement director is retiring, there's a need to put some of that in not legal, but then at the same time, there's a different operation for code enforcement that is a legal thing, right? So we want to make sure we think through all those, and we're making an effort to do that, to make sure our organizational chart is efficient, provides for efficient continuity for decisions and how we function. So that provides by code enforcement director. We're not advocating to hire a code enforcement director. What we're advocating is putting one code enforcement officer embedded under a captain in the police department and doing the same thing, but focused on more of the legal code enforcement issues than the other things that are tied to development. Go ahead.
Yeah, the way I looked at it was the business day 8 to 5 stuff would fall under community services. So sidewalk repairs, weeds and grass, even building condemnation, that kind of stuff would fall community services. But the 24/7 stuff, like parking, noise complaints, those kind of more police enforced side of things would fall under police. It's kind of the way we've.
Like Mr. Reed, his complaints would fall under us.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
that's
part-
Mr.
yeah.
Reed, and to verbalize that for the TV, Mr. Reed that was here at the commission meeting Monday night, that's a code enforcement issue, but that goes to the police. That's not fixing a sidewalk.
So with this same, did you say captain? Will they be the ABC person as well, or will they?
Probably not on codes.
Okay.
It'll probably be the day shift captain would take that.
And I'll add, one of the benefits for me, one of the reasons we talked about doing this is we need to step up our regulatory side of engineering. So when we talk about stormwater inspection, those kind of things that we've kind of lacked on in the past just because we just haven't had the personnel, I'm not a good regulator. Like my personality is not. So so when we talk about generally it would be good to bolster that in our department. So that
When you have an erosion
I've already
problem.
talked to the
Yeah.
code staff about, hey, I need you to also to be looking for these things. I'm going to get them trained up on stormwater inspections and things like that, and illicit discharge detection, that kind of stuff. So there's some overlap there that's really going to benefit me as well in stuff we're working on right now in engineering.
To be effective in the state's eyes, the stormwater department needs to be able to issue a violation for stormwater compliance.
Put Ms. Calhoun in charge.
And so this does that.
So you would put a code enforcement officer in public services and then one. in
Community
police department.
services.
Community services and one in the police department.
Yeah.
And parking would be in
Police.
police.
Yes.
Yeah.
Under that same, there's a parking officer also.
Yeah. And the parking, that's the parking officer
Parking
as well
officer will go
goes.
with you.
goes-
Parking officer goes to the police, back
Okay.
to the police,
Right.
like it was originally.
Okay.
But Bridget and I were discussing that there's still going to be overlap. We'll still have to, the good thing is both departments will be trained up on what each other does. So we'll have you will be able to support each other if, people are gone, if we're there's a really good opportunity there that we could just, it's not going to be completely siloed apart. We're still going to have to work together and support each other. So.
It's
And-
sort of
and
like
5
the
years-
IT, sort of like your IT department.
Yeah. 5 years from now, you may change it again to something that works better. But to me, in the short term, where we're at right now, this seems like a better alignment, given the demand for staff time. And so that's kind of all the discussion we have today. 12 o'clock.
Does
To-
everybody have their, does everybody have an IT person, or do they have enough, do we have enough IT to support all of our staff and all the computers and all the safety and all the things that we have?
I think, well, I'm sure they could use another one, but right now, you know, I think the police would be happy if they had somebody just doing police work all the time. Right.
That's what I'm,
And
that's,
so that's what Nick and I have to talk through.
Okay.
And, you know, whatever we do, we want to do it while we have, you know, the experience like we have of Nick.
right.
You know, I mean, to help guide us
I
through
mean, you've got
whatever
your
transition.
utilities, obviously, and your police, your fire, your not, all of them, and then
Right.
just general. So I just wonder, is there enough support there?
Yeah.
Probably justifying IT for the police department, which stands on its own, is to add the fire department.
Yeah, correct, yeah.
Similar disciplines.
So then you have an IT and emergency services.
Yep.
Yeah. And then, you know, the improved IT and skate in the water system side, and then the network administration stays. I like the idea of embedding, there are several cities that do that have the IT under the jurisdiction of the city clerk, strictly because, not because it's a technical capacity thing, but because there is a lot of policy tied to the use of your equipment, a lot of policy tied to cybersecurity, things like that, embedded closer to the commission. You know, that's some of the thoughts that we've gotten as we've called around, but we want to do a good job. And Nick and I have even talked about having maybe even having a company come in and say, how would you organize? Not necessarily as a consultant, but just have a meeting with somebody and really brainstorm with some outside folks that do contracted IT services for cities or do contracted consulting for, you know, bigger enterprises that have restructured their IT to modernize it.
Well, maybe, I mean, going through that leadership thing with KLC, they've done that with their IT. We got to go through their whole department. So you might talk to them, the guy
Yeah.
that's over their IT there.
Yeah, Nick and I have talked about going through that exercise, and I know he's patiently waiting, just like I am, to be able to get to it. And I think it would be healthy to do that for all of us. Yeah.
Josh, good news on wayfinding, you got a timeline?
Yeah, you know, nothing's certain yet, but we had a really good meeting with them, and we went through each sign and addressed their issues, and they have a revised version in front of them now at KYTC, so hopefully we get a permit soon. So.
If we had that money set aside 5 years ago, we'd have a lot of interest built up, I know. So we're going to independently, for and JH as well, the mayor, turn in what we think the community agencies should get. And then Ashley will probably condense that down to averages.
That's what we did last year.
Yep, which makes a lot of sense. So the new one, you kind of made reference to it, Art Center of the Bluegrass, will that just be played out as it does, or did you mention we might want to have a discussion about that?
What I'd like for you to do is do the same thing you do with the other agencies. You all put down a number that you feel, or maybe 0 or whatever it is, and then we'll work towards. What I would like to do is try to build a recommendation based on what I see from you all, and then I'll include that recommendation next week. So if you get your information up to us Monday, Tuesday-ish, then we'll make sure we have that in the budget discussion up on the screen, communicated, and that will represent collectively what we interpret, what we see.
Piece of cake.
Well, I appreciate all of you, the explanation of the department. Josh, that helped a lot of each line of what's in there, and Marshall, I appreciate everybody for doing a good job, but it was good for me to hear the explanation of what's in that money, you know, that you got listed there.
And I wanted to add, the parks, we'll go over it more with the workshop, but this was my first draft based off our first meeting we had. It's kind of a start. A lot of this money in here is finishing up what we're doing now and then design for future. So there's a lot of design cost in there. So you get a chance to look at that and kind of come to whenever we have the workshop, come ready to kind of go through this and prioritize what we want to do moving forward.
And when is the workshop? In a couple months or?
No, we'll
Soon?
try to schedule that when Ashley gets back.
Okay.
We'll try to start working towards some of those dates.
Okay.
Especially if we want to have, it's good that we, the whole getting public feedback, I rely heavily on you all as that feedback, right? And if you all want to do something which y'all have expressed, I appreciate hearing that. And so we've got to build that into the schedule a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Nope.
Thank
Appreciate
you. This is very informative. Well, does anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
Donna doesn't, but
Melanie wanted me to mention
Oh.
the ribbon cutting. I see she's back because I missed. The tennis courts ribbon cutting Monday. I know it's kind of last minute
I'll
scheduling.
be out of town.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss it, but I'll be out of town.
They were trying to do it before they start they're going to start the region tournament at 1 o'clock Monday, so we're going to try to, we're on noon. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so,
Yeah.
and we're going to, are we going to have food trucks and stuff there? So if the community's welcome
Wow.
to come out and hang out with us. There should be a good crowd there because there's going to be a lot of kids playing tennis all day.
Yeah, the good thing is that we're hosting the region the first year we built the complex.
yeah, that's pretty good.
And that's
Great.
the first day. And so to the credit of the idea, in the master plan to do a regional tennis court place, I mean, that's going to get used a lot
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah, it's really nice looking.
Yeah. And now we'll start working towards the pickleball courts at the other site, now that this is done, and get that freed up and try to make some folks happy.
Thank you.
I was gonna wear my T-Rex thing on Monday. I can't figure out how to make that work. I'd have to drive here with my T-Rex. I would kill somebody. My head sticking out the window.
Head sticking out the window.
Okay.
you did.
Did somebody make a motion to adjourn?
I thought that
No,
was you.
I'll make a motion to
Okay.
adjourn.
Second?
Those in favor say aye.
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 None opposed? We are adjourned.